For the second year in a row, Penn State might be looking to hire away another Ohio State coach.
You are Locked On College Crossover, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
That is right. It is a Locked On crossover to talk Penn State and Ohio State football. My name is Zach Seyko, and I'm your co-host today, host of Locked On Nittany Lions, your daily source for all things Penn State sports. He is Jay Stephens, co-host here on this episode, host of Locked On Buckeyes, talking all things Ohio State daily. Brian Hartline. Penn State did it with Jim Knowles. Didn't really work out. Hindsight's 2020, but that doesn't mean Penn State can't try it again and see if it works out for the better. But we're going to talk about Penn State and Ohio State a week early, give you our early thoughts on this upcoming game. Does Penn State even have a chance? Why they could pull off the upset? Is Knowles' defense just too complex? It's too complicated. Penn State was in over its head with this hire. We're going to debate that, but focus on Brian Hartline potentially leaving Ohio State for Penn State's head coaching job. Today's episode is brought to you by Mazda. Like our players, we sweat every detail because when you make every move count, pulling off the unexpected is only the beginning. Stay tuned later for highlights in this week's Moving the Game Forward. Mazda, move and be moved. Friendly reminder to let us know your thoughts down in the comment section. Be a part of the discussion. Jay, I think this would be another massive hire. Jim Knowles, again, it didn't work out for Penn State, but somebody that has developed wide receivers, the best in all of college football for such a long time. He has the recruiting connections. Why not? He should be a head coach somewhere. If it's not Penn State, I think he should be somewhere. So we're going to go through all of that, why he would be a great head coaching candidate, what makes him the ideal hire for Penn State. But I would like this move because it worked with Dan Lanning in Oregon. So Penn State should probably strongly consider this here, honestly.
I think they should too. The only thing that makes me kind of hesitate to move forward with Hartline to Penn State is his inexperience as a head coach because he hasn't been that before. But you look at his current boss and Ryan Day, who hadn't been a head coach in the NFL or in college before taking over after Urban Meyer retired, and it worked out very well. So while I'm a little hesitant with the inexperience around Hartline, I think his ability to develop receivers and recruit overall is one thing that would be very big for Penn State because his ability to recruit anywhere, any receiver, any part of the country is something that they can tap into and then just allow them to expand the entire roster. And so his connections, as well as his ability to identify talent, which I think is one thing that gets kind of glossed over a little bit, is a coach's ability to identify talent when you're in 8th grade or 9th grade because your body is still developing. You're developing as a player. You're developing as a person. And if you can figure out a guy in 8th grade or 9th grade early that fits some traits, you might get in on him earlier than a lot of other big schools because you have an eye for that kind of talent. So I think Hartline to Penn State, it should be something that Penn State should consider. While he is an inexperienced coach, at least never being a head coach before, I think he has a lot of attributes that make him a great candidate for the Nittany Lions.
Now, does this actually happen? Would Penn State consider a first-time head coach like this, especially somebody that's never been a play caller before, right? I mean, he's just been the wide receiver position coach until being the full-time offensive coordinator play caller going into the season. And I got that wrong. I thought that would be a struggle that, hey, Brian, and you see the speed bumps along the way, right? It hasn't looked perfect, but it still looked, honestly, like he hasn't been a first-time play caller. Let's just put it that way there. So Hartline, if I'm a Penn State fan, I would be excited about that hire because it would be something different. It would, once again, it would take away from the team that's just kept you in that second tier of the Big Ten for over a decade. It would open up different recruiting avenues. It would make Penn State's offense fun again, to say the least, right? Brian Hartline, he doesn't have head coaching experience. Hire the staff members around him to help him succeed. Penn State has the resources to do that. I believe that Penn State is a top 10 job. It is a destination job. And Hartline, if you can surround him with guys who have the head coaching experience, just solid coordinators. Okay, maybe Jim Knowles actually stays on staff. Who knows, right? We'll talk about that more in the second segment of Jim Knowles at Penn State and why it hasn't exactly worked. But you could really maximize this. Just go and get somebody that is going to bring other elements of the college football game. I'm not talking about the X's and O's. I'm talking about how to develop position groups that Penn State has not had, particularly at wide receiver. What Brian Hartline would ultimately attract to Happy Valley that Penn State has not had under James Franklin.
I think one thing with Hartline that kind of sets him apart from other candidates is his ability to, how do I say this? His ability to manage egos year after year after year. And I'm not even trying to say that Jeremiah Smith and Carnell Tate and Marvin Harrison Jr. and all these guys, they have massive diva type egos. I'm not saying that, but they all want the ball. There's no receiver in that room that doesn't think that they're going to get open when they're on the field. Brendan Ennis has not been a big part of the offense for Ohio State, but I guarantee you that man wants the ball too. And his ability to manage egos before 2020 and after 2020, because I think the egos and the mentality of players is kind of like a pot of Americans. Like, we just gone through some stuff in our minds a little bit different. I think that's a big tool that he has that he's been able to utilize at Ohio State in a very big way. And for Penn State, like, I don't want Hartline to leave. Like, everyone's like, oh, do you want Hartline to leave? No, I want Hartline. I would prefer him to stay at Ohio State till he retires. I know that's not realistic. He has already been open about saying he wants to be an NFL head coach. And so maybe the path for him is to be a head coach in college before making the jump to the NFL once again. I don't know, but I think his ability to manage the egos and the personalities in the wide receiver room for multiple seasons and do it pretty flawlessly is a great asset for him. And I think Penn State likes that about him too.
I think this would be a home run hire for Penn State at the end of the day. There are obviously other head coaching candidates that would have more experience, okay? But there are workarounds for that. Okay, you could keep Jim Knowles and continue to build off of that because, hey, we heard from Ohio State people that it just takes a little bit of time. Okay, you were right. So do you want to sell out on that, or do you want to continue to build off of the momentum? Do you want to take away an asset away from a program that, again, has just been a thorn in your side for a decade? I like the idea of this. I like the recruiting aspect of it. I like the connections that he would have, and you could just supplement everywhere else. Go get a head coach for an offensive coordinator. Go get a former head coach, or keep Jim Knowles as the defensive coordinator. And I think it would work out if you are going to go in this direction. But, and I think Penn State's they're in a spot where they can take this kind of risk on somebody that's inexperienced. If it doesn't go well, okay, you give them 3 to 4 years and you say, hey, what? Part ways. If it doesn't ultimately work out, you don't have to commit for 12, 15, 20 years. That's the ideal. You would like to do that. That's the ideal setup. But it doesn't have to be this truly all or nothing thing. I like the hire personally for Penn State. And Hartline would just bring with him a lot of things that Penn State has not had.
Potentially some receivers too. I don't want any of those guys to leave. But if he does say he leaves at the end of the year, a guy like Quincy Porter, who got some run against Wisconsin this past weekend, he could be gone. Which I would hate for that, honestly. I think he's going to be a really good receiver.
That would be Penn State's best receiver of the past 5 years. Easily.
Yeah. I mean, if he goes, wherever he goes, there might be 2 or 3 guys that follow him. Ohio State will take a hit, but Ohio State's had great receivers for decades, and I don't think that would change.
Oh, yeah, no, it wouldn't. It would level the playing field a little more. Yes. I don't think Ohio State would lose out on all its wide receiver recruiting and not be able to develop it all. But it would be a little bit of a step backwards. Penn State would get a level playing field. And on top of that, talented wide receivers will also naturally attract a talented quarterback. So Penn State, a lot to look forward to if Brian Hartline ends up being Penn State's next head coach. I think Penn State should be willing to roll the dice here with that. And I don't even think that's much of a risk. You accomplish a lot with Hartline as your head coach because of everything we explained. Now, Jim Knowles, some people are saying move on from Jim Knowles, and I actually laid out the case why that might be in Penn State's best interest, depending on what direction they go in, because now we see Jim Knowles' defense is very complex. Is it too complex? Why did Penn State make a move like this when they needed to win now, but he brings with him a 3-year plan? The Knowles debacle, we'll talk about it next here on this Locked On Crossover episode.
This episode is brought to you by Mazda's Moving the Game Forward. For those who believe it's not just about playing the game, it's about redefining it. There are moments that do more than put points on the board. They move crowds, move culture, and keep moving the game forward. This week's moment that moved the game forward is Carnell Tate's first touchdown against Wisconsin. It's one that even about a week later, we're still reveling and still excited about because he put a move on the DB, got to the open spot in the end zone, beat two guys. Julian Sand put the ball where it needed to be, and Carnell Tate came down with it. And I think about the video and just thinking about what I saw in the moment and thinking about Carnell Tate's growth throughout the season, and that showed up in a big way on that touchdown catch. When you follow what moves you, the unexpected is only the beginning. And just like there's more to every highlight, there's more to a Mazda vehicle. Mazda, move and be moved.
Jim Knowles' defense, yeah, it's too complex, especially for Penn State. And there's hindsight's 2020. There's a lot of regrets that Penn State would have in the situation in win now mode. But Knowles, he can build up a defense and get them peaking by year 3, and then just let everything go from there. That's why he was signed to a 3-year deal. But I thought this was the best move that Penn State could have made. That okay, yeah, there's going to be, as I said before, speed bumps along the way, but surely it can't be that bad. No, it's been that bad, Jay. And Ohio State brings in Matt Patricia. I question the hire because recently he struggled in the NFL, but Johnny Manziel actually framed it very, very accordingly. That this is somebody that's gone up against Peyton Manning, Tom Brady, Ben Roethlisberger, Drew Brees. He's coached and had to scheme against the best of the best at the highest level. The college level, it's going to be easy for him. It's going to be easy for him. So I imagine that Patricia won't be at Ohio State forever because I think he's going to get, it's same thing with Chip Kelly. He's going to want to get back into the NFL as a way to prove himself. But this is easy for him. And for some reason, it's just a mess with Jim Knowles and Penn State's defense.
When Jim Knowles and all the news started to come out in regards to him not being invited to the national championship celebration and him looking for other jobs and he's going to Penn State, a lot of Ohio State fans were really, I won't say, they were hurt by it. They were annoyed by it. And they were like, why would you leave Ohio State to go to a team they battle with very, very closely every single year? It just doesn't make any sense to them. And so you would assume, now I assume, Zach, that when Jim Knowles went to Penn State, that what the players that Penn State was bringing back and the type of defense that they normally run, that it was almost like a ready-made situation for Jim Knowles to go in there, implement a system, and things would be okay. They're not okay. They're okay at Ohio State because I think Patricia, I don't want to say found new life, but he's been rejuvenated by being in Columbus and being around these 18 to 22-year-old young men. While he's not only coaching them on the football field, he's helping mold them and be great men once they're out of college. And so I think for Patricia, he's gotten back to coaching and teaching, which he really, really loves. Mm-hmm. Jim Knowles' defense, it is complex. It is frustrating as someone that is covering it, I'm sure, for you, because you're like, these guys are really good. Why is it so complicated? Well, it's always been that way. That wasn't just a story about Ohio State. Everywhere he has been, his defense has been complicated, and it takes 2 to 3 years to fully grasp it. In year 1, it's probably going to be the worst of it. It also ended up getting potentially a big reason why James Franklin doesn't have a job right now. Yeah. It's weird. Not James Franklin. I believe Jim Knowles is a good defensive coordinator, but I don't understand why he does not dumb down the terminology and the calls so these young men can understand it and just play fast and free.
That's what everyone is saying over here, and what Penn State has actually tried to do. Terry Smith, the interim head coach, has said that he's admitted it and said that we've tried dialing it back and it's still not enough. So do you dial it back more? And forgive me, I'm not the football expert to that extent where, okay, what do you need to do to dial it back? At what point do you turn the knob and then it's like everything's fixed? We can simplify it so much. I understand the advantages of it because then it's harder for an offense to scheme for it, and you fall into these traps. You get tricked very easily. There are players there when you're not expecting them to be. So I understand the adjustments from that angle of it. Now, if Penn State were to go with Brian Hartline, I think keeping Jim Knowles would make a ton of sense. Notice how Penn State didn't fire James Franklin, Andy Kotelnicki, and Jim Knowles all at once. because I think there is an interest to say, all right, we did get a really good defensive coordinator. Why should we move on from him, especially when you invested over $3 million per season to make him the highest paid defensive coordinator? If you do go with somebody that's completely different, wants to change up the system or change up the philosophy for Penn State, Jim Knowles bringing him back would not be a good idea, because then you restart the clock. It's year one all over again. New players from the transfer portal, new head coach to try to figure it all out, especially if you've never worked with somebody like Jim Knowles. Whereas it's different. If you have Brian Hartline come in, you're able to retain a decent amount of Penn State's current roster, keep Jim Knowles going into year two. But since I'm anticipating, I don't think it's likely that Penn State hires Brian Hartline. I think they go get probably Matt Rule, or Joe Brady is apparently gaining some traction, gaining some steam here. If that's the case, you got to go away from Jim Knowles, because then the same issues you dealt with this season are only going to carry over and linger into next year, especially since the transfer portal, you're going to see a lot of players move on that know this system. Doesn't matter anymore. You're starting the lessons all over again.
I think it's going to be interesting to see what happens with Knowles based off if they hire an offensive minded head coach or a defensive minded head coach. I think if you find the defensive minded head coach, you're probably going to get rid of Knowles and then bring somebody else in. You're also going to help the school save some money by doing that too, because I doubt they're going to get somebody that's going to demand the high dollar that Jim Knowles does. If you get an offensive minded head coach, you might keep Jim Knowles, which might frustrate some of the fans and people like yourself that cover the team, because you're thinking, well, if we keep Jim Knowles, we're going to wait at least one more year, maybe two, before you get the best of Knowles. And his track record is after 3 years, maybe even 4, he's gone. So you got to kind of prepare for what's going to be like if he's there for 2 more years, as well as what's life going to be like once he is gone, because he doesn't stick around places that long. And so I think for Jim Knowles, his time could be coming up and be ending very shortly, depending on if they get an offensive-minded head coach or a defensive-minded head coach.
Yeah, especially if his system conflicts with. That's why Brian Hartline, it makes sense. Keep Jim
Yes.
Knowles. That's a no-brainer, honestly, in my mind. Especially if you're able to retain. I'm okay with that. I'm actually okay with keeping Jim Knowles at Penn State. It would make sense if you're able to retain a decent amount of the defensive roster, and you bring in somebody that's worked with him or understands his system and can help make it stronger. Because if you're in year 2 of the 3-year process, so to speak, you're a step ahead. You might as well not go back and completely scrap it. But again, I think Penn State's not in a position now where they expect to contend for national titles in year 1 and year 2. So I'm okay to be patient and say, all right, if the best is still to come with Jim Knowles, why give that up? Why push him out? Especially when you made the investment that you did, when you're actually headed in the right direction. It's just a lot of growing pains on the way. But if you're going to have to start from zero again, no, then I'm out on it. It doesn't make sense, and it hurts you long term.
It does hurt your long term, but I think it's what they're trying to avoid is the long term pain that could be coming from. I think there's long term pain, well, potential short term pain from firing James Franklin. There could be long term pain if you lose Franklin and lose Knowles as well. The Franklin thing is interesting because I look back and I forgot all about the 2021 season where Penn State went, I think they lost 4 games in a row towards the end of the season. I could be mistaken about the streak of it, but I think they had like 4 losses in that year that were so uncharacteristic that made you kind of question, after what happened in 2020, if Franklin was going to be able to bounce back. And he did in 2022, 23, and even 24. Bounced back in a very big way. This year just felt different than even 2021 did. And so there is going to be some short-term pain that losing him and Knowles in the same season could be long-term pain where Penn State fans could see themselves falling back to the second tier in the Big Ten instead of the top tier consistently competing for Big Ten titles.
If it means that Penn State will eventually get back there, I'm patient. I'm willing to wait 2, 3, 4 years. If, hey, year 5, year 6, year 7, you're back in that consistent tier. So I don't think getting rid of Jim Knowles is going to have that kind of impact the same way that James Franklin would, because Jim Knowles is not a recruiter. Okay.
No.
And he is the architect of the defense. That is his job. I understand that. So if they were happen to move on from Jim Knowles from a player personnel standpoint or who they'd be able to get to Penn State, I don't think that affects the Nittany Lions in that regard. But you made this investment in one of the best defensive coordinators. Objectively, that's still the case, even though they're struggling right now. I don't think you should just move on from him just like that. But it might make sense to, if you go in that direction with a different head coach that conflicts with his system. All right, back to the present. As Penn State and Ohio State are playing a game that, well, Ohio State does Penn State even have a chance? Does Penn State, well, I am here to say that they do have a chance to pull off the upset. It's unlikely, but Penn State is making a lot of changes that Ohio State should definitely be aware of. That's coming up next here on this Locked On Crossover. And this episode is brought to you by DoorDash. It's almost the weekend. Time to look back and crown this week's MVP on Who Delivered, powered by DoorDash. Just like you can win every Saturday with DoorDash Streaks, saving more every time you order, these players delivered when it mattered most. Now let's break it down. For Penn State, I'm going to go with Kaytron Allen. I know it wasn't a losing effort, but Kaytron Allen really put the team on his back. 28 carries, 145 yards, over 5 yards per carry, and 2 touchdowns. He really kept Penn State in that game against Iowa. When the pressure was on, Allen came through, no hesitation, no delay. And if you've been watching and following week after week, you know that Kaytron Allen was due for this kind of performance. And just like Allen delivered for Penn State, DoorDash delivers your Saturdays. With DoorDash Streaks, you save every Saturday you order. Stack it up all season. You could save up to $250, including $100 in DoorDash credits. Order this Saturday. Keep the streak alive. Fuel your game day only with DoorDash. Terms apply. Promo period through November 18th. And this episode is also brought to you by FanDuel. The NFL season is here, and FanDuel has an offer that you do not want to miss. Right now, new customers can bet just $5 and get $300 in bonus bets if you win. That's right. Pick a bet, put down $5, and if it hits, you'll unlock $300 in bonus bets to use across the app. FanDuel gives you so many ways to play. You can build parlays. You can try player props. You can even follow live lines during the games. It makes watching football even more exciting when you've got a little something riding on the action. And whether you're a casual fan or you love diving into the stats, FanDuel makes the game day experience so much better. And lines are available for Penn State versus Ohio State. Ohio State is a heavy favorite, 17.5 points on the spread, minus 1,000 on the money line, plus 640 if you're thinking Penn State for the upset. Total is set at 47.5. And remember, if you're a new customer, you can bet just $5. And if that first bet wins, you'll get $300 in bonus bets to use all across FanDuel. So what are you waiting for? Visit FanDuel.com to download the FanDuel app today and get started. So as I said, Penn State is a 17.5 point underdog in this game against Ohio State. But the Nittany Lions, I will say, are going all in. They are not taking this game lightly. They had a closed off session for the offense at a recent practice for a new install period to add a wrinkle. They're not changing the playbook. You know, that's too late in the season. You can't do that. But I like that Penn State they're moving. They're active. They're trying to do things to give themselves a competitive advantage in a game where Ohio State has all of them, right? Something, whether it's the element of surprise, maybe they found something on film that exposes a subtle, maybe it's not a weakness. Ohio State doesn't have a lot of weaknesses, but something that isn't necessarily a strength. And I appreciate that when it comes to after losing James Franklin, after the season's completely over. So if Penn State wasn't making these adjustments, I would say that Ohio State would run them out of the building. This wouldn't be close. But just kind of listening to Terry Smith, the interim head coach, seeing the actual tangible changes and adjustments that they're trying to make, this is a game where Penn State might be able to cover, but they're not going to win. I don't think they're upsetting Ohio State here.
Penn State is always one of those teams, Zach, that puts a little maybe fear in some Ohio State fans' eyes. That they may say, "Oh, we're not worried about Penn State. We're going to beat them." You might beat them. You might only beat them by 2 or 3 or 4 points because Penn State's always good. The one weird thing with this team, Zach, is I think about even that line of 17.5. Penn State still has a lot of the same players they were going to have at the beginning of the year. They're supposed to be one of the better teams in the country. So it's not like this team is just void of talent. It's just the philosophy and some of the confidence. It's really just confidence. The confidence the team is lacking right now is something that if they were fully confident, even with the backup quarterback, Ohio State would be put on notice saying, look, you cannot just roll into this game and play like you did against Illinois or play like you did against Wisconsin, and think you're just going to roll over and win big. The backup quarterback thing to me is very, very interesting because if Drew Aller were playing, even with the lack of confidence, I think Ohio State fans would be a little bit more nervous. Not because Drew Aller is the best QB in the country. He's very experienced. He's seen a lot of football. And maybe, just maybe, the game that he plays against Ohio State, he doesn't make a Drew Aller-esque mistake that he made at the end of the Oregon game. And so I think for this game, it's kind of weird because these games are always very close. So to say 17.5, it's a little shocking to me. But I do see a scenario where the wrinkles that Penn State puts in, the new things on the offensive side of the ball, as well as how Kaytron Allen is running right now, I think those two things they'll force Matt Patricia to take them a little bit more serious than he already was.
And as much as I would like to say, Penn State's going to go in there, leave everything on the football field, at some point, talent does matter. And Penn State, despite having those NFL caliber players, it hasn't looked the same because, hey, you could point to a lot of different things. Players just not fitting into Jim Knowles' defense. On the offensive side of the football, I pointed out that a guy like Jay1 Sider made Penn State's running game that much better. He's now over at Notre Dame. And you see why Penn State has taken such a step backwards, because you just lose one of those offensive minds collectively that help game plan, that help scheme. And that wasn't replicated. So it's those things when you look in hindsight that, yeah, Penn State's just not the same team, not the same caliber of team. So there's a lot of individual players that are good at football. They're great at football, but then when you bring them together, it's not the same product here. So for Ohio State, it's pretty simple. All you have to do is sell out for Kaytron Allen, sell out to stop the run, and you don't have to respect the pass. It's the same. It's the tale as old as the past few years anyway. And now with no Drew Aller, you have a backup quarterback that is good. He's okay, right? He's okay right now. He's a good prospect. I think he could have a good college career. But going into a second start on the road in Columbus against the number 2 defense in the country, no, I don't have high expectations for him. Okay. So if you're Ohio State, you say that Matt Patricia is going to have to do some things extra, and you really don't. Put 8 in the box, dare them one-on-one on the outside against some of the best cornerbacks and defensive backs in the entire country. Let Caleb Downs do his thing, act as just kind of not a QB spy. That's not what I want to say here, but just somebody that just sits in the middle, because he's not a center fielder. He's not a free safety, but just someone that can roam. He's a roamer. And just let him read the quarterback and then allow Grunkemeyer to make those mistakes. I really don't think it's actually that complex of a game plan that Matt Patricia needs to run. Take away Kaytron Allen. I don't really know what Penn State can do from there.
That's a good way to put it, because I don't either. I don't. I had higher hopes than I thought I was going to have this year for Penn State's receivers.
Me
because
too.
They just look a little bit different this year, and it just didn't work out. I believe they're leading the guy with the most receptions is still a tight end. His name escapes me right now. Trevor Pena, I think, is a leading receiver, but even those numbers, they don't jump off the screen and say, oh, they're elite weapons. You have to put a lot of resources towards them, like defenses have to do for Jeremiah Smith and Carnell Tate. I think for Penn State's defense, those dudes are going to come in very, very hungry. And Ohio State's offense has been trying to figure out the run game. They have the weapons on the outside that I don't know if anybody can stop. But there's a weakness on the offensive line right now that Ohio State has that I would not be shocked if Jim Knowles tries to attack that part of the Buckeyes offense. There's one thing that I think it's Jim Knowles knows Ohio State's offense, knows Ryan Day, and people have talked about that quite a bit about how Knowles knows what Ohio State's going to do offensively. Well, Ohio State also knows what Jim Knowles' defense is too. So that goes hand in hand. Yes, Jim Knowles knows Ryan Day and Hartline and the offense. He hasn't coached against or even gone and practiced against Bo Jackson, so that's a new wrinkle. But Ryan Day hired Jim Knowles for a reason. Ryan Day, before the hire, I guarantee you, he went through the film, looked at Knowles' philosophy, knows the schemes, knows the formations, and he's thinking, I want that guy in Columbus. So Ryan Day knows the same thing. So that's one of those things where I'm wondering, does Day have more input into the offense? Does he take over play calling at some point in time to make sure that the man that he once hired does not get the best of Ryan Day in about a week and a half from now.
I don't think that's going to be the case because kind of like Penn State's offense, the same thing applies to the defense. Basically, take away Zane Durant, take away Deni Dennis Sutton, take away Amari Campbell, and then you have to deal with those wide receivers on the outside. So you're probably going to have to leave Zach Wheatley back because that's Penn State's best player to this point in time. And it's like, okay, that's great. Your safety's making a tackle. That means we already got 8, 10, 12 yards as it is. So who cares? But if you take away those 3 players in the front 7, then you can basically do anything. And this was against Iowa, Northwestern, UCLA. Oregon was Oregon. They put up over 30 points, right? That game went to double overtime. But that's when Penn State's defense actually looked its best, was against Oregon. Go figure, right? So this group now where it is, struggling against those abysmal offenses, making them look elite, I can only imagine how this is going to go with Ohio State, no matter the amount of game planning that you put together, no matter the amount of motivation, fire, passion, whatever. At some point, talent, you are just going to be out-talented. Jeremiah Smith, Carnell Tate. You mentioned Bo Jackson at running back. I know he's a true freshman. The thing that Penn State, I think, fortunately has going for them is that Julian Sayin is not a true dual threat. He is not going to be a guy that's going to tuck the football and run unless it's an emergency type of situation where you need a gimme third down right here and no one's spying the quarterback. He's not somebody that is going to hurt you with his legs throughout the game. He's not a risk for that. So, but it's still Ohio State's offensive line. They're just going to they're going to double team Zane Durant. Nobody else is going to win their one-on-ones. They'll take Deni Dennis Sutton out of the play. Then they'll move to the second level, take Amari Campbell out. And there you go. Good luck, AJ Harris covering Jeremiah Smith one-on-one on the outside. Good luck to Elliott Washington covering Carnell Tate on the outside. I really don't know what Penn State's answer is defensively other than heart and passion. Okay.
Heart and passion can get you some things. It might not get you a win in this game, but it'll get you somewhere in life. I'm trying my best to talk myself into this being a traditional Ohio State Penn State game, Zach. And
it's not.
The more I try to do it, the more I realize it probably won't be. It probably won't be one of the classics that we have watched over the past 10 years, 15 years maybe. The one thing you mentioned about Julian Sayin not being a true dual threat, dude, I will lose my mind if he starts making runs like Mark Gronowski did last week and he just starts showing off his legs in a way that no one expected him to do. I'll lose my mind. I'll be on the show like, this guy is a dual threat. But before the season, Ryan Day's like, we're going to need both quarterbacks and even try to use a QB power in a short yardage situation with the backup. And all of a sudden your starter can be good in the read option game and can be good. And he could be a run threat in the RPO. It's like, what is this? What's going on? Because I don't think he's not. I don't believe he is. But if he shocks us all, Ohio State might blow Penn State out way more than we think they're going to.
Yeah, it could be bad. And who knows? I mean, they might look like a true dual threat. It's been that, and they can't tackle, so it's been that bad. If you can't tackle, if you take away 2 players on a consistent basis, and then your defense falls apart, like there's only so much you can do to scheme around that. That is where we're going to wrap up this Locked On crossover, and we're going to do it again next week to actually talk about the game and some other headlines and storylines to follow as Penn State and Ohio State do play a ball game. Ohio State looking like that national title contender. Well, Penn State trying to find its next head coach, which it could be in Brian Hartline. So we'll keep an eye on that. But thank you to each and every one of you for checking out this episode. Subscribe to both of our YouTube channels and wherever you get your podcasts for daily Penn State and Ohio State content. My name is Zach Seyko. He is Jay Stephens. Jay, thank you so much for the time. Really appreciate it as always.
Thanks, Zach. I really enjoyed this. Looking forward to doing it next week before the game.